about their experience going down to Antarctica, or up to Antarctica, depending on how you look at it, and they worked down there for a while. Now, they saw some real strange things after a bit. I want to actually read the article. This person says, I was in the Army from 1997 to 2000, and I was sent to McMurdo Station in Antarctica. So this guy was a helicopter mechanic and a crew chief, and they had volunteer tours that were open for guys to go there and to work on the helicopters that were there. When they asked for volunteers, a bunch of us applied, but only me and one other guy got accepted. The application process had a bunch of questionnaires that we had to fill out, and we had to sit for a bunch of the interviews. It was mostly a bunch of questions about what our interests and our beliefs were. Isn't that interesting? You would think that they would be more like questions about survival or your academic skills or your intelligence or, you know, your mechanical abilities and stuff like that. But he says that they really actually focused on their interests and their beliefs. Isn't that interesting? That they would like to know that before they choose to have them come and work in Antarctica. What do you believe in? What are you into? What kind of things do you think about, you know? I was sent to McMurdo Research Station in August of 1998. When we weren't busy de-icing the aircraft and working on them, we had time to hang out with the scientists at the research station. The military unit attached to McMurdo was small, and we didn't have our own separate facilities. We didn't have a PX or a media center. There was no chapel or chaplain, and we didn't have our own separate mailroom. We just had to share the same facilities with the scientists and the researchers. So remember, he's working on a helicopter, and basically has to bunk up with like the scientists of the group or whatnot. And then he says, so over time, I got to be friends with a few of them. They had two different kinds of ice that they worked on and studied. One kind of ice was the normal kind that we've all seen. They took hores out of the ice and they bowl hores into the ground. Just like normal ice, it was mostly clear sometimes and white, and it would melt into liquid water if it got warm. The whole area of Antarctica is covered in this kind of ice, but that wasn't their main kind of ice. The only time I ever saw them actually studying normal ice was when the film crew from National Geographic had come by. He says the rest of the time, which was most of the time, the scientists were studying something they called sky ice. Sky ice. Interesting. So it's not regular ice. He says this stuff was totally different. He says we were never allowed to go into the laboratory areas of the station because the labs had to be kept super clean, and they said that it would mess up their work, and they risked letting too many people, it was a risk if they let too many people into the lab. But one time, one of the researchers that I was friends with showed me a piece of sky ice. You couldn't touch the stuff with your bare hands because it was so cold. And, check this out, it wasn't clear or white like normal ice, it was solid blue. He said that's why they called it sky ice, because it was the exact same color as the sky itself. And he goes on to say, we had to wear our thick, heavy, going outside gloves to handle it. The stuff was so cold it would instantly freeze on your skin if you touched it. I don't remember what temperature he said it was, but it was something like hundreds of degrees below zero. Way colder than normal ice that was outside. He had to carry it in a metal bottle that was kind of like a thermos. He let me play with a piece of it for a while. It felt lighter than a piece of normal ice of the same size. Like, it wasn't very heavy at all. It almost felt like you could throw it up in the air and it would just float back down. But I did not try that. And it was also a little bit flexible. When I tried to bend it, it didn't break like normal ice would. And even for a small piece, you couldn't see through it. It was solid blue all the way through the surface. And here's the really weird part. It didn't melt into water. When it got warm, it didn't melt into water because we had it inside. It just started to shrink. It got smaller and smaller. But my gloves never got wet, and there was no water on the floor. The stuff just turned into thin air when it got warm and vaporized. That this was the reason why they had to study this stuff right there in Antarctica. You couldn't take a piece of sky ice back to America to study it because it was almost impossible to keep it cold enough during transit.
What are we doing today?
Well, you're going to want to put those on because we're going to work with dry ice.
Yeah.
And dry ice is solid carbon dioxide. It's 109 degrees below zero, hence the gloves. You don't want to touch it with your bare hand. You could get frostbite.
Wow.
Okay. And so the neat thing about dry ice and where it gets its name from is that it never changes to a liquid at atmospheric pressure. It changes directly from a solid to a gas. And so you can see that.
Hypotransvaporation.
Really?
I don't know.
I've never heard of that. we call it sublimation. Okay. You can't see the carbon dioxide gas because it's invisible. But if you drop them in the water, you can get an idea of how much gas is actually coming off.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's sort of the spooky thing you can do during Halloween is to create those bubbles. Now, in this container, I've got an acid-base indicator. So the liquid will change color as it turns from an alkaline solution into a more acidic solution. So you get that cool sort of Halloween orange sort
It would
of.
always vaporize into the air, and you'd have nothing left when you got back to the United States. After maybe 15 minutes of handling the piece of sky ice, it was almost completely gone. Just a tiny bit was left, and my glove was dry the whole time. He says I'd never seen anything like it before or since. And that's unusual because I've always had an interest in scientific things. I think that's even why I got selected to go to Antarctica, because a big part of the interview was about science and what I believed about things. So I really thought it was cool to see something that I've never heard of before. The whole time I was at McMurdo, I heard people talk about the wall, like that was a special place. It's pretty common to find ice walls and ice cliffs all over Antarctica. The whole place is ice. But it's all just normal white or clear ice. So I asked my friend where they got the sky ice from, and he said it comes from the wall. To hear them talking about a place called the Wall, or he has been hearing them the whole time talking about this place, right? Because that's where they get the sky ice. He says, I don't remember exactly how he described it, but apparently there's a huge wall of sky ice in Antarctica. He said that it was hundreds of miles inland from the coast. I never got to see it myself because I was only stationed at McMurdo. I didn't get to go out on expeditions, and he said it was the biggest natural structure in the world. He said in the 1960s, the US Army had a plan to bore a tunnel into the wall. Check that out. In the 1960s, the Army was there to bore a tunnel into the wall. You know, they didn't have a boring machine that could handle super cold temperatures. I have a boring machine. It's called TV. Okay, that's terrible. All right, let's read on. They did not have a boring machine that could handle super cold temperatures, so they had a whole testing project in Greenland. Oh, now we're going over Greenland. Check that out. The testing project was in Greenland, where they developed ice tunnels and invented new boring machines that could operate in super cold temperatures, like they did this whole big thing in Greenland just for practice. Then, once they had a new boring machine figured out, they brought it to the wall in Antarctica. He said that the machine bored a tunnel, I don't remember exactly, like 5 or 10 miles into the wall, but they never broke through to the other side of the wall. And that they still don't know how thick the wall even is to this day. Isn't that insane? Probably not remembering this part correctly. At first, the floor of the tunnel was solid rock, but after about a mile or two in, the floor was sky ice. Like it was sky ice underneath after a certain point, or something like that. And apparently the wall slowly builds itself back up after you cut it, because after a year or so, the tunnel had shrunk smaller all by itself. They had to leave the boring machine inside the wall because the tunnel shrunk too small to get it back out. And after a few decades, the tunnel was completely gone. Like, that part of the wall was solid again. Isn't that insane? Now the scientists were trying to use technology to figure out how thick the wall is. He said something about putting earthquake sensors along the wall, and that somehow you could measure the signal from an earthquake to see how thick the wall is. I never really thought about any of that after I left. It was really weird stuff, but I didn't think that it was a big deal at the time. But then I saw a few weeks ago a map of the wall in Antarctica. Except the map was all flat, and it was crazy looking, and it showed the wall going all the way up over the whole Earth. And that's the end of the
So how do they convince an entire Earth of people to stay slaves, to stay in one confined prison? It's to create a cosmology that teaches them, hey, you're on a little blue ball. There's only limited land and resources. At any given moment, a cataclysm can happen. Be scared. We're running out of room. We're overpopulating because we're on a little blue ball. And there's really nowhere to go besides 7 little continents. You got 2 ice caps at the top and bottom, trapping you in. And, that's it, pretty much it. And you spin there and you just keep spinning. That's it. Nothing else to look forward to, guys. All right? You can pretty much travel the entire globe in your life twice and be like, man, Earth is pretty small. You really think the Earth is this beyond small? Antarctica? Antarctica is not what they're telling us. It's not a continent. It's a ring that encloses us. And once you travel outward from the center of the Earth in any direction, you will meet a 200-foot wall. Now, they show us this in a lot of movies. They even got a movie called The Lord of the Rings. They are the Lords of the Rings. They are the guards of the gate. They guard the gates with the Antarctic Treaty. Okay? So no one can go beyond and climb up the wall and try to go out and explore these continents. They'll shoot you down. Why? Why? You think your government, who destroy this Earth every day, really care that much about Antarctica staying natural, that they just killing people for trying to explore it? Think of how much money can be made off of people exploiting these